Hello, everybody. Welcome to Baby Magic Granny Sense. I have today with us Sally. I'm laughing because we just spent half an hour getting connected, and we spent reasonably, I think it's kind of months since we first agreed we would chat. But hello,
Yes.
Sally. Welcome.
Hello.
Could you
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. Could you introduce yourself for our listeners?
Yeah. So my name's SallyGoLightly. I find it really hard when people ask what I do. I guess kind of fundamentally, I'm a doula. I'm a birth worker. Educator for antenatal education. But I also do lots of other things around that as well. So I run circles to support women with their mental health, and also run training, creating circles to help give other people the skills and the confidence to hold safe spaces themselves. And I run a bit as well.
You run a bit. That's an understatement.
I run a bit, yeah.
So I've been looking at the things that you write and the words that you use, and one of the I love words. I've been whenever I find a good looking word, I always look it up and I find the root, and I love using them and I love knowing about them. So could you talk to us about the word liminal and how it relates to what you do?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Really good question to start with. So, liminal is transition. So, periods of transition, moving from one thing to the next. And I think I've come across the concept quite recently, maybe the past year or so. But for me, it really encapsulated really quite succinctly what my work is about and what I think it's always been about. So before I started work as a doula and an antenatal practitioner, I was a probation officer for 14 years. So a lot of my work involved supporting people in their transitions from the community into prison, and then from prison into the community. Managing change in that respect. And then I became pregnant with my first child in 2009. And I think perhaps like many people, I decided that wasn't going to change me in any way. What I was simply going to do was add a child to my life. So I'd worked very hard to be where I was professionally, and I really loved my job and felt that I would do that until I retired. And I was simply having a baby. That was all that was going to happen. And actually, what ended up happening was that I had quite a challenging pregnancy, in that I felt that I was being pushed down a route that I didn't want and I didn't need, and I felt like I had to fight quite hard to be heard, and that felt really challenging, particularly when I worked in the public sector, and I was used to supporting other people, like working within a framework. It felt really quite challenging being at the other end of that, and I found that I wasn't able to articulate and communicate, and I just felt like I just wasn't heard, and I found that really frustrating, that I wasn't able to do that for myself. And in the end, I did, and I had a really positive, empowering birth experience with my first baby, and that really kind of changed the trajectory of my work and my life. And it, like, I think when people look at it from the outset, they think it's quite random that I've moved from work as a probation officer to then birth work, but for me they both involved these liminal spaces, like these points of transition, and passing from one thing to another. Instead of from prison to the community, it was from pregnancy to birth, and the transition into parenthood. And then like, I guess the more that I kind of go through life, I think we find ourselves in these liminal spaces, and people generally don't talk about how we navigate them. So, thinking about other liminal spaces, death and the menopause and quitting jobs, leaving relationships, they're all things that like most of us kind of experience, but we don't talk about how we navigate that enough.
We really don't. No, not at all. Now that I'm getting older and being a grandmother, and I mean, people started getting up for me on the bus already five years ago, but I it's just funny, I remember one time I had actually just run a half marathon, and I got on the bus, and this just lovely young man got up and gave me a seat, and I was like, "Thank you so much." But I know it wasn't because I'd just run. It was because I look old, but those transitions, the aging transitions, and you're absolutely right. We just don't have any language to speak about them.
Mm.
So
Yeah, I think that's
your
it,
work,
isn't it? Like words.
yeah, the language and the time as well, because it's supposed to be that we just kind of do things, and you know,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I found that in, certainly in the creative spaces that I've opened. I guess what's pretty unique about the circles that I've held, not completely, but is that we've got a broad spectrum of experience. We've got a broad spectrum of age range, and for me, that's really crucial. That's really important. I think it's really helpful when you've got a toddler or a little baby. I think it's really helpful to hear about what it's like further down the line. Like, nobody ever told me about, we talked about tantrums and teething and weaning, but what nobody told me about was the continual grief that you feel as your children grow. Like, it's immensely, like, you're proud, and it's like amazing to watch, but there's also this letting go, and
yeah, and it's
yeah, I
constant.
can only describe it as a kind of loss.
Yeah, yeah, it's really constant and bittersweet your whole life.
Yeah, yeah, it doesn't ever go away, and yeah, in the circles that I've held, I think what's happened is that as people talk about their experiences and where they're at, it helps other people find the words to describe what they're feeling, whether it's the same or not, you know.
So it sounds to me that you seem so busy. You work as a doula, a birth and postpartum. You
Mhm.
lead your Creating Circles course. You're a mother and a grandmother, and you run. What ties everything
Mm.
together for you?
Um, like, how do I balance the things that,
Yes. Yeah, because the question
do you mean
isn't,
how
"Oh, how do
how
you
I kind
do
of,
it all?" Because I know how it is to do a lot of things, and I think any mother really does know that.
mm.
But I would say, how do you balance? How do you tie it together so you don't feel desperate all the time?
Yeah, I guess so. For me, it took a while before I realised that movement was important to me. I think I spent a lot of years being very sedentary and quite happy with that. Um, I After I had my first, my husband started running, and then I had my second baby, and I just noticed that he was spending a lot of time like outside, and it really helped him to decompress, and so I started running small loops, and what I noticed was that I felt better. So when movement was in my diary, and when movement was in my week, it made other things feel a lot better. So what I was able to do when being outside and being in nature, it just helped me to decompress and to process things. And quite often I would just, I don't know, I just kind of work things through in my head in a way that perhaps wasn't always conscious. But I would come back and, you know, perhaps have an idea for I don't know, like a social media post, or an idea for a group that I might want to run. So I think movement really helps, like that massively helps. But I'm also becoming to realise that I also need rest as well. And I do enter, like I enter races, and that helps me to work towards things. So it helps me to it helps motivate me to get out because there's a purpose to getting out. But I can also feel quite tired as well. And if I feel pressured to get out, so if I feel pressured to do the mileage, then it doesn't work for me. It's just something else to feel stressed about. So I think kind of knowing my body and knowing my head, and, you know, if I'm feeling kind of anxious, if I'm feeling out of sorts about, you know, with something, then just stopping and kind of unpicking and working out what that is. And quite often it's because I haven't listened to my body. I haven't listened to what I need, whether that's movement, or whether it's being still as well, whether it's decompressing and resting.
I think so many mothers, from newborn mothers all the way through up until I don't know when, find it hard to rest. You know, there's always
Yeah, I
something or
think
other
we've
to
got a kind of
fiddle around
glorification
with.
of being busy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so many
Yeah.
times you ask someone how they are and they say busy, and that's, I guess, supposed to be something good, or yeah, it seems to be
Yeah, I
something that
think
we say a lot. Not sure it's a great thing to be busy all the time.
yeah. I think yeah, as well, I'm just kind of like learning what works for me. I've always had a few things on. I've always needed to juggle a few things. Like I think it
Mm,
helps keep me
mm,
you know, interested and kind of moving forward. So you know, I do need to have a few different plates spinning. I find that stimulating and interesting. But it's really tricky to kind of keep that going, but also, yeah, factoring in the rest as well.
So specifically the work that you do, do you find that that running long distances has informed that and helped you with your work?
Could you just repeat the question? Running long distances.
Has it helped you? Does it inform your work? What I mean to say is
Um,
the yeah,
yeah.
thank
What I find, I mean, I do. What I find really interesting about the running, and I'm not sure. We were just chatting about your half marathon. I'm not sure what kind of races you've done before, but I quite like the long ones, and I quite like going into the night. And the kind of races that I do are very similar to birth work and being at a birth. I mean,
yeah,
you know when it'll end. That's the only
yeah,
difference. Like, you know where the finish line is. But I think
yeah,
you,
yeah,
and you
exactly.
certainly in other races, like you get, you know what I mean? Like that kind of, you get to that breaking point,
Oh,
don't you? I think
absolutely. Yeah,
that, you know,
yeah. I mean,
yeah,
I actually wrote a really fun little blog post a few years ago. I started running late, and I actually, my newfound love is trail running, but I did, because I live in a city, so I've done a couple of marathons, and the longer the distance,
yeah,
as far as I'm concerned, the better. I'm slow, but whatever. I'm 65, so I'm not expecting myself to go very fast. But
brilliant.
after I ran my first marathon, I wrote a little blog post about how lovely it is when you're running a marathon. No one tells you you might throw up, or you might, you know, get chilled, or you might feel like you can't do it, or like no one says, oh, you need an IV because like
Yeah.
you're thirsty,
No.
or like, oh, I don't think you can do
Mm,
it because you don't think you can do it, so let's carry you off on a stretcher and give you an
yeah.
epidural. Like, it's just like, you go,
Yeah.
girl, and like have a little thing of water and have some orange slices. And I think,
Yeah. And the mind
yeah, you're
games.
you're
Sorry,
just
go
you're
on.
yeah, no, you're just speaking exactly the words that I really hear what you're saying. But you were just
Yeah,
going to
and I
make an
think there's
interesting
something
point
really kind of
about the mind games.
exhilarating about it. Yeah, yeah, I think it kind of was from like you don't get anybody saying, "Oh, you can't do it." Um, yeah, like the stories that you tell yourself when you're in a race, you know, what kind of get you through birth, or what you use to help people who are giving birth. And like I kind of always describe in kind of antenatal education that people who, after they've had their babies, those those women who have described their birth as pain-free don't report higher satisfaction than those that report some level of pain. So some level of pain relates to increased satisfaction with their birth. So I think there's a whole kind of notion in the West that, and other countries I'm sure, like that no pain increases satisfaction with birth, or increases a positive like correlation with birth. And so we become fixated on this this kind of aim of having a pain-free birth, and whatever that kind of looks like. But actually we know from the studies that that's not true. Like those that are most satisfied with their birth also describe some level of pain and discomfort. And I think the only other area of life that I've experienced that is in long distance running. Like you would never have somebody who has run a marathon or even done a long distance walk. I often describe like sponsored walking. People don't describe it as pain free. They describe it with some level of discomfort and pain, and that's varying. But they also describe that satisfaction that comes with that. Like they're both like the opposite sides of the same coin, but that's kind of part of the deal, isn't it? That's
Yeah,
the package. And then it becomes about how we
it's
manage that.
interesting. Yeah, and the satisfaction of being in the driver's seat and dealing with it,
Oh yeah,
however one decides to deal with it. But it's interesting, the
yeah,
whole
yeah.
concept of pain-free childbirth actually started in communist Russia in the 40s, and
Okay.
it was a male doctor that decided this whole kind of theory of how the Soviet women could give birth more effectively without feeling pain. And so it never came from us that we shouldn't feel pain when we're
Yeah,
giving birth, and that we can't just feel the pain and get through the pain and then have the baby.
yeah.
But
It
yeah,
was often
it's in
associated with the
everything. When
feminist
I mean,
movement.
so much of the yes, well, they took it up, but they didn't look at the
Yeah,
root. That's why my word is radical, and I don't mean carrying banners or anything. I mean looking at the root of things. If you actually look at the root of
yeah,
things, the way the I would say the feminist way of looking at childbirth would be more accepting that women are strong and women can feel pain, and just as
yeah,
running 50K, you're gonna for sure feel some pain through it, but you'll get to the end or not, but it's still
yeah.
your real experience.
And you being in the driving seat of that is so important. If you decide to stop, you decide something like that's important. It's quite often when I hear stories of birth trauma, it's about people not being listened to. It's about those who are caring, like not listening to what that, what the woman wants in labour. It's not necessarily about how
Yes,
babies are born. It's about
absolutely.
who's in
And
the
it
room.
isn't who it's about the woman herself feeling like she is the center of attention and the center of the event. I've had um
Yeah.
I attended someone years ago, it must have been 15 years ago, and she really was traumatized. It was her second baby. She had her first very quickly without any interventions. For the second, she wanted to have an epidural. The
Hmm.
nurse didn't let her. And by the end of it,
Yeah.
by after the birth, she told me, that was what I wanted. It was my choice. I wanted
Yeah.
it. It
Yeah.
wasn't for anyone else to tell me
Yeah.
what I want, what I could have or shouldn't have. So yes, absolutely. And I mean, the ridiculous thing when you compare giving birth to really any kind of running, even if you like, I went on, my 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 running buddy has had three years bout of going through cancer, and so we
Wow.
went on a 3K run for the first time since she got sick, and it wasn't a run; it was a very slow walk, but we did it. No one told her that
Hmm.
she couldn't do it, and it's so funny
Yeah.
when we're actually bringing humans into the world, instead of running around
Yeah.
whatever, that we're told
Yeah.
that we can't do it. And I think that there's something very,
Mhm.
very radical about. I mean, I think we need to look at why that's happening. And
Yeah.
and I think that part of it is exactly what you were saying about when you were talking about the word liminal, that we don't know how to
Hmm.
deal with transitions.
Yeah.
So tell us more about creating circles.
Yeah. So creating circles was my lockdown baby. So I'd been running a group called Maternal
The
Journal
podcast was my lockdown
for.
baby.
Oh, really? Wow. Isn't it interesting? We just get creative in lockdown. Um, yeah, I'd been running a group called
Yeah.
Maternal Journal for a couple of years, and I'd come across Maternal Journal. It was the idea of a midwife in London, midwife and artist, called Laura Godfrey Isaacs. And as soon as I heard it, I just immediately resonated with it. So I'd always journaled, and it just seemed like such a valuable resource. Um, and then I sat in a different. So I've always kind of sat in circles. I perhaps sat in my first one kind of over a decade ago, and certainly felt that there was something different within a circle space. So you have somebody facilitate on a theme. They may like open the circle. Um, there might be art-based things or other creative endeavors, or it might be more ceremony led. But ultimately, you're holding the space as a facilitator and enabling the people sitting in the circle to come forwards and to share. And actually, the kind of power of circles is in who's there and who shows up and how they share and tell their stories. Um, and what I began to notice was that, some circles worked really effectively and really well and felt very safe spaces, and others didn't. And I also spoke to quite a few doulas and peers who wanted to start their own circles, their own spaces, for lots of different ideas. And I'd always had it in my mind to provide training to support people in holding their own circles, and actually, what lockdown did was give me the space and time to really do that. And I I went on holiday, like it's 2 years ago now. I went on holiday to the Highlands with a notebook and just wrote it. Yeah, wrote the plan. Um, wrote what it was about and the kind of concept of it. My I kind of strongly feel that people can't hold space and run circles unless they have an opportunity to do that themselves. And so the course is interactive, it's supportive. We are exploring how circles work whilst sitting in a circle. And to do that, people need to be brave and they need to be vulnerable, and they need to give of themselves. And so yeah, it's just such a magic place to be. But once it's set up, it's really amazing to see where the circle takes it. I've never run one that's exactly the same, just because the people who are there are very different. But yeah, it's really, really interesting.
So, is it mostly in the birth work kind of world, or because I mean, you can do circles in any kind of field,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, what do the people that take your course,
Yeah.
are they mostly birth workers, or yeah,
I
be
had a
interesting to move it
list.
out
I had a list
into
written.
different fields.
Yeah. So, um, before lockdown, I'd gone back to university and studied adult education, and with a view to tutoring for the NCT, and that kind of gave me, I'd had the kind of years of experience of facilitating groups, but going back to uni kind of gave me the theory to to explore what was happening in learning spaces. And what I thought when I launched Circles, I thought that other doulas would come. So other doulas would come who perhaps wanted to run creative journaling sessions, or postpartum sessions. But I purposefully set it up so that we were giving the skills rather than the content. So we deep dive into the skills and the practice, and exploring what makes circles feel safe and what makes them feel unsafe, and what do we need in order to show up and make a start. What helps us to step forward in these spaces, because it'll be the same for other people. And so I thought it would be people that had, perhaps had a similar path. What I didn't want to do is create a content that was really rigid. So I could have quite easily given people the format of what to do in those circles. But I felt that in doing that, I was restricting people to only create circles that were in my mind. And actually, if people were able to bring what they were interested in, we would have a far broader spectrum of circle work. And yeah, I give people content, but I give it right at the end, if I give it at all, just because people come with their own ideas. So yeah, we've had a whole range of people come on the course. So we've had doulas and midwives and birth workers. We've had lawyers and physios, and 3 PhD students. Interestingly, we've had a few people that have come who are in a liminal space themselves. So perhaps following a bereavement, or having time off work, or having resigned from work. But there's a kind of commonality in the people that come, is that they want more. Like, they feel like there's something more that they want in their work. And it just, like, for me, it just feels like soul work. I think if you feel that pull to create these spaces, it's hard not to listen to that. Like, it's hard not to listen to it.
Well, it's very valuable work, and I'm really happy that I I'm happy that I met you, so that you can spread the
Mm.
word. It's just so important. I think that um, many of us these days are building some foundations, especially since the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
I think that we're building foundations of, I don't know how to say it, maybe just foundations of that we
Mhm.
can rely on more than what we've had for the past, few hundred years, especially for women, I
Yeah.
would say.
I think people are feeling a really
And
strong
it's funny because I,
disconnect, and
yes, very
yeah,
strong.
like I had one
I'm not
person
sure
come to
how it
me.
is in your community, but here in,
Yeah, I had one
sorry?
person come to me and say, I had one person who came to creating circles. I was having a dialogue with them before they joined, and they said, "I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is that I want to do. I don't know what circles I want to create. But all I do know is that I don't want this. You know, where I am at the moment, I don't want this.
Yeah,
Is that enough?" And I
yeah,
said, "Yeah, that's enough.
yeah,
Like it's enough to say this doesn't resonate anymore."
yeah, yes. And that's happening, I think, all over the world. And I think it's a
Yeah,
moment where we can put some seeds in, and hopefully they'll grow into more of a possibly gentle place.
yeah.
I
It
I
feels
I wrote
like the
a
whole kind of
question that I was going to ask you. Go on.
sorry, there's a bit of a clash, isn't there, when we talk? I'll I'll keep I'll keep talking.
No
It's
worries.
interesting. Like
We
we've just
both have
finished
so much to say.
um I know. Um, we've just finished a session today, so it's the last one of the spring circles course, and one of the themes that was coming out quite strongly is this perception of how we've viewed education and academia and status, and you know, certainly in the UK, like a lot of credence is given to accreditation and university and qualifications, and I think within that, there's a kind of model of education that sees the facilitator as the teacher and the font of all knowledge that is imparting wisdom to
Hmm.
to the people who they're sat before, and really circle spins that on its head. So, I know some stuff like I'm an experienced facilitator. I've gone to uni to explore adult education and group work skills, but I'm also acutely aware that I don't know how other people feel in the circle, and also they've got so much to bring and to give as well, and I think we just get so much more from that. And what I noticed in this last session is that what people were remembering were it was some of what I would said. Some of what I'd said, they'd said, I remember that's really stuck with me, that's really landed with me. But what had also landed with them was what other people had shared. And and that's what circles is about. It's like, kind of viewing people's autonomy and stories, and giving them information, but enabling them to make sense of that in their own worlds, like assimilate that with what they know and their own prior learning and experience. Because that's what we do. It like we do that anyway in education, but I think there's a whole big emphasis on reading the reading lists and churning out essays, and I'm not sure how productive that is.
Yeah.
I guess it kind of meets the need of a small group of people, but actually, most people, integrate it in other ways, and that's what I kind of really like about the framework of how creating circles is structured, is that it meets people where they're at, you know.
Um, I've been thinking a lot about that myself, and I'm starting a course in January 2023. I'm teaching a birth attendant course, and it's really so deep because you have knowledge as a doula. You have knowledge about birth that is different from a woman that you're
Mhm,
accompanying. So, for example, if she,
mhm,
if something's going a little odd and she tells you, you will know that that might be a red flag, and she won't know
mhm.
that. And so the whole concept of experts is such a difficult one when you're talking about women and their bodies and their babies.
Mm.
One of the reasons I stopped
Yeah, and
doing doula work was because I started knowing much more than many of the medical residents, and they resented it. And I didn't want
mm,
a feeling of resentment in the birth room. So
yeah,
it's a very complicated, the whole question of knowledge and expertise and then immediately authority.
yeah, it's a really kind of delicate balance to navigate. And yeah, I mean, kind of, as I think how I approach it as a trainer and as a facilitator in terms of antenatal education is kind of drawing out what people already know, and then delicately kind of weaving in other things. People, I think, do they need like 14 exposures to something before they like recognize it? It's a long time for people to kind of assimilate
Yeah.
new learning. And I start on the off like that, in whatever spaces I hold. I'll say some of the things that I talk about will confirm what you thought, and some of it will challenge it. And and, and learning isn't always like comfortable. It can make us uncomfortable, and the skill of the facilitator or the trainer is to hold that space.
It can make
Another
us
liminal
very
space.
uncomfortable if we realize that we're learning something that is opposite to what we've believed up until now and very tempting to believe. So changing your mind and admitting that perhaps your original ideas weren't the right ones is such a difficult thing to do and so
Yeah.
unpopular.
And yeah. And I think it's got to be done with tenderness, hasn't it? It's got to be done with love.
Hello again. We're doing part two because technology failed us last time. So I'm meeting up with Sally again for some more questions and chats and good energy. Um, Hello, Sally. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I've gotten on a little bit of a different tangent for part two, and I I actually watched a really inspiring documentary yesterday. It's about Stephanie Case. She's the woman who created Free to Run. That is an organization that helps girls and women in conflict-ridden areas to to get out and do sports, to run, to hike, to get empowered with play. Um, and she actually came third place in a 450-kilometer run in Italy back in last year, and she's amazing. And she talks a lot about women in sports, particularly endurance sports, and how um, we're not as hidden here as we are in Afghanistan, but we're still hidden. Um, so,
Yeah.
could you talk to me about that? Talk to me about being an ultra runner. What does it feel like to run the distances that you do, and how do you feel when you've done it, and how do you feel as a woman running those kinds of distances?
Um. Oh, that's lots of big questions. So I think I'm not sure. Kind of over my life, whether running was really encouraged. I think it was, but perhaps not as much for me as my brother, and never really had a particular kind of interest to run. Certainly through my teens and 20s. Um, I I kind of came at it just so that I could spend some time by myself and spend some time to decompress, and didn't. I kind of came to it because somebody said it's a nice day out. You get to eat lots of food, and and just keep moving. And I thought, well, that sounds okay. The food at the first event that I did was quite well renowned for being good. And actually, what happened in that race was that a lot of people dropped out. The weather was quite bad, and I actually like found myself quite up, not not up at the front at all, but just with a lot of like more experienced runners and a lot of men, and that felt really quite powerful. um, and I think I just expected it to be like steady and slow and away, but actually during that race, I think I learned so much about myself in terms of perseverance and what I was capable of, and it tapped into something I think that was far greater than anything else I'd experienced from a sports perspective. So I always found running and any type of physical activity really quite difficult and not really worth it. But actually, what happened after that race is that I felt really empowered and came out feeling that I'd just tapped into something that was incredible. And for me, the kind of closest analogy that the closest I've experienced to that has been birth, in terms of it being quite transformative and tapping it. It's not necessarily something that's easy, like it's very challenging and tricky, but the sense of achievement afterwards is quite similar. And I felt that, I don't know, as a woman, I think it is harder to access these things. I think there's things like throughout society and culturally that make it harder for women to move and harder for women to move long distances, not least because caregiving tends to fall to us in a way that I don't think is the same for fathers who run. Yeah, I don't know.
So
I think there's lots.
what's the longest you've ever run?
So I don't know whether it was documented as I can't remember what it was advertised at. I think it was advertised at 100 miles, and it was nearly 110 by the end of it. I think
And so
that's
what was the
the
proportion of women to men when you ran that one?
I'm not sure, but a lot of the races I've been in, like I've never been where there's been an equal field of men and women. And
Yeah,
all
I
the
think,
races that I've been in, they've tried to more women to run.
yeah, because trail running is really different that way. Road running is pretty well, I don't know, in North America it's pretty well evening out. But trail running is so different that way, and
Okay.
partly because of that whole sense of, oh dear, you shouldn't be on the woods on your own, in the woods on your own.
Yeah, so
What could happen
I
to
mean,
you?
yeah, I mean, that's something that I've really kind of wrestled with. So I live near the moors, near the Pennine Way, which is a route in the UK that kind of runs up the spine of England. And there was a murder of a woman in Ireland a few months ago, maybe last year, and lots of advice came out then about don't run on your own, don't run at night, run with your car keys. There's tell people where you're going. So immediately the information that came out to women runners was to curtail their behaviour.
Yeah.
Curtail your behaviour, make adjustments, and then you won't get killed or you won't get assaulted. And that weekend I'd planned to run at night down the Pennine Way, so I was just going to go by myself. And in the morning I just kind of flicked on Instagram, and Dame Kelly Holmes, well respected and accomplished athlete, had put a post out saying, yeah, this is how you keep yourself safe. Don't run at night, don't do this, don't do that. And in the bottom of my stomach, I just thought, I'm making the wrong decision here. Like, maybe I shouldn't go out tonight. And then it got me really angry, and I thought, no, I should go out. I've planned to go out. I am going to go out. Like, I shouldn't have to curtail my behaviour because of what a man's done and what men do. And so, yeah, I went out and had a really good run. But I just thought, like running at night makes me feel free, and I really love it. I think we tap into something that's so primal that it's just incredible being up on the moors with a head torch on your own. And I just remember thinking, don't take this away from me. Don't take this away from me. Don't tell women that they can't do this, because it's just setting us back.
So
Yeah, I
here's the
went out.
thing, though, that I was thinking just when you said that, don't take it away from us. It's exactly the same in birth, because what happens
Yeah.
is it's not like in Afghanistan where, the fathers of young women and girls are actually, locking them in the house. No one's actually taking it away from us. We're taking it away from ourselves with the fear.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's exactly what happens in the birth world, Oh, well, I think I'll go to the hospital with this OBGYN who I don't like, who's scaring me, because what if something happens? So I want to be safe. I don't want to have an
Yeah.
epidural, but what if, what if something happens? And it's exactly the same. We could just all sit in bubble wrap with IVs on the whole time instead of ever doing anything. And I think we're our own
Yeah.
worst enemies in so very many ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have my
I just think
full
it's
and utter respect. I just love the idea of you running through the moors with a headlamp on. I love that.
yeah.
I'm not that
Yeah.
brave
Yeah.
yet.
I think
I've
women
yeah.
women are told too much, like, about what to do with their bodies and what not to do with their bodies. There's just so much pressure on that actually to swim against it is really hard. If everybody else is saying this is what you should be doing, then it takes a lot of confidence and gut and, yeah, kind of grit determination to step away from that and think, no, it's not right.
Well, it either takes confidence and guts and determination, or it takes a kind of a childish willfulness. Because my very
Yeah.
lucky memory is of when I was a young teenager, and I grew up next to the Rockies in Canada, and I used to hitchhike out to the mountains and hike and run on my own completely. I never thought about it. I never thought about scary wild animals or scary humans. I
Yeah.
was just enjoying myself. So I think if we can tap into that, you know,
Yeah.
reasonably naive, childish innocence to have fun, then that's valuable too.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of emphasis is placed on what people were doing and where people were going. I mean, the irony is of the woman that I talked about earlier was that the whole narrative around when she was murdered was about she was just going for a run. That was what was reported. She was just going for a run. So actually, she was running at daytime. She was running in a busy place. All the things that people have, were then telling women not to do. Actually, it didn't apply to her. Because she was, she was doing, I don't know,
Oh,
what was
that's so sad.
perceived as something safe. Yeah. And
Yeah,
that didn't save her. Actually, that didn't save her. And so it isn't that women need to change, it's actually
yeah,
society's behaviour and
exactly.
how we report that and how men behave that need to
Yeah.
change. Yeah. So
So
yeah.
when you go out running, do you listen to music?
Sometimes I never used to do, but because I enjoyed having the quiet. So I enjoy listening to nothing, particularly when I first started and had young children at home. Actually, the opportunity of going out running and not having anything to hear apart from nature was just
Yeah.
really lovely. And I'm pretty sure that still sometimes I could hear my children shouting mum, even though I was miles away. But now I do mix it up just because, sometimes with the longer runs, I want something else. So sometimes I'll listen to podcasts or Audible or music, it just helps distract me and help me kind of stay out longer.
Well, if you have a favorite playlist, I'd love for you to send it over. I'll put it in the show notes for the podcast. I'm always interested in what other people are listening to.
Yeah, I can do. It's really random.
Lovely.
I will do. So always something to kind of help me move, like keep me moving. A little bit of Black
Yeah,
Eyed Peas in there.
yeah. So we were talking about your beautiful creating circles, and I was thinking
Yeah.
about it, and you were talking about tenderness and love. Um,
Mm.
what would you say is the most important quality that a person needs to hold when they're leading a circle?
Oh, just one. Just one's hard. I think probably. I think to be able to truly like listen and hear what other people are saying in the circle, without turning it and orientating it to themselves, without them thinking about how they're going to respond or the experiences that they've had. To truly kind of sit with someone and kind of understand where they're coming from. I think it takes some, kind of curiosity, um, to really hear people and not make assumptions that their perception of the world or different things that are discussed are the same. And yeah, kind of patience in doing that. I think it takes confidence to step back and listen and allow, that kind of helps others, enables others to then step forward and take up space. And I think we've got so much more to learn from people when we have that curiosity and when we listen to them in a way that helps us to hear what they're saying.
It's interesting when you just said that allows them to take up space, and that's exactly what we were just talking about. To take up space in our own birthing experiences, to take up space in on the trails,
Mm.
to take up space as
Yeah,
active and powerful humans in the world,
yeah, and have
and
and
to do
have
it with
the
that.
start with the premise. To kind of start with the premise that other people are the authority in their lives,
Yeah,
and that they know what's best. They know what's best for them, and their births and how they're going to run a race. Like they know their bodies
yeah,
ultimately, and yeah, and in circle work when we're holding space, we're just holding space so people can think that through and turn that over in their heads and tap into what feels right for them. I think the world is, has enough experts, like it has enough viewpoints and standpoints and experts in particular fields, but there's something about growing that in other people or enabling other people to find themselves and find what's right with them. I think like the older I get, like the less I know. I've just got more questions.
I had an experience in a circle a few years ago, and I'm going to tell you what it was, and I wonder how you unfold this in terms of, well, let me tell you the story first. I started running retreats up in my mountain hideaway up here, the year before COVID, unfortunately. So one of them was a women's healing retreat, basically healing from just the busyness of our lives. So it was an unplugging, um, un
Yeah.
just retreating from the world. Lots of long walks. Every morning we had a
Uh-huh.
circle. One of the one of the
Yeah.
participants in the circle was much more needy than the others, and because we were
Uh-huh.
all reasonably well versed in actually holding space for others, um,
Yeah.
we decided almost non-verbally and almost as an organism to let that person, let's say, I guess, access a lot of the sympathy and compassion in the circle.
Uh-huh.
So what I'm wondering about, especially nowadays, it seems to me that so many people are so needy right now because of the pandemic and
Uh-huh.
because of the isolation and all the things. How do we open up that tap of compassion and let it run its course and not limit it or not have to make those decisions about who gets to access it? And so I guess I'm asking as a challenge for someone who's actually holding a circle, what do you do in those instances where it seems like absolutely everyone has such need?
Yeah, I think we can have where everybody has such need but contribute in a way that's balanced and is sharing space. And that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has an equal opportunity to talk, because there might be some people in the circle who are quite happy to listen. And certainly in some of the most powerful circles I've been in, have been where there's been quieter people and the quieter members of the circle, and then they've messaged me afterwards and said, I haven't spoken about what's happening for me in my life, but actually this space has enabled me to reflect on what's happening, and I've made like significant changes as a result of being there. So I think it's not necessarily that everybody has to contribute to be of benefit, but I do think we need to be very careful when we're in circles if it gets to the point where it feels like the circle is therapy for one person.
Mm.
And what can happen is that other people in the circle then feel not heard and begin to feel silenced or inhibited, or like quite simply not having their needs met. And certainly I've seen it with parents of younger children. Quite often circle work is a way, is a means of being held and being heard, where perhaps their days might be filled with little people that are talking a lot and making various demands on their time. Stepping into a circle is really important, that they've got the space just to be. And if they step into a circle where there's one person who's dominating that, I think it's really hard, because they then have spent all day listening to a little person, and then they move into a circle where they're spending all their evening listening to somebody else. And I think that's really challenging. And some of that can be about, I don't know, some of it can be resolved by how it's set up at the beginning. Some of it might be done collectively as a group. So acknowledging, like, how does this feel? How would we like it to feel? And for the group to share that balance. And and sometimes it might just be about talking to the person that that perhaps is doing most of the talking in the circle. Yeah, because like the premise of the circle is that we all come together and we take up the same amount of space. We don't take from other people. So I think certainly the key is about balancing that, so that everybody is heard or feels that they have an opportunity to hear. And in some circles, it's done in different ways. So in some circles, it might be that they put in some quiet time for reflection. In other circles, they might start with those kind of group rules. So there's that cohesive agreement. And other ways, they might have a talking piece or a talking stick, so that people have their dedicated time to talk, and then it's passed around and it's moved around. But I really think it's the skill of the facilitator to ensure that there's that balance.
Yeah, I think there's a certain agility that we're talking about here that is really important. And I feel like also we're talking about the spaces between, the silences, the talking, and then the silences again, and that is echoing what we were talking about before we started recording, just the understanding that the body needs to rest and recover as well as,
Yeah.
exert. So those interesting back and forth movements between silence and speaking, and between active and rest is so interesting.
Mm. And I don't think we're used to doing that. Um, we're used to filling the silences. We can feel awkward as facilitators, and I think that's sometimes what happens. That we're used to more of a perhaps teacher-led or lecture-led approach, where we feel as a circle holder we need to be doing the work or the talking or stepping in. And actually, one of the first things that we explore on circles is silence, and how that feels, and to play with that, and to allow silence, because often it's an indication that somebody's reflecting on what's being said in the room. It's often that they're going inwards and turning over the discussions, and it's a crucial part of them moving the circle forward.
So the final question that I have for you is because we've been talking the whole time about transitions. What do you think the key is for our culture to be able to better hold and honor transitions?
Yeah, I think perhaps how we used to do it would be through dialogue and discussion, and for it to be at home and within the community and talked about more, and there would be ritual associated with transitions. I think what would make transitions easier is to reconnect with that, and what helps people to kind of navigate changes in their lives, to speak with other people who've either made those changes or can hold that space and witness how that feels. I don't think we do that. I think the kind of narrative is to rush people through transitions, and I think it's done with compassion. I think we don't want to see people hurting, and so if we offer solutions and try and make things better, then there's a perception that a person will move through transitions quicker. But actually, honouring all the feelings associated with change and death and grief and loss, and it's not necessarily just it's not we're not just talking about death, but we can be talking about loss in whatever format. That's easier when we're kind of witnessed and held through that, and we're allowed to process how that feels. We're allowed to hurt, I guess. It's quite simple, isn't it? It's powerful. That's important.
I was working with a woman last summer. She gave birth last summer. I did really extensive prenatal, really fun actually prenatal. It wasn't a course or anything. We spoke every Sunday morning. She told me it was kind of like going to church for her. It was every Sunday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning on
Oh,
Sunday. We would speak for an hour,
yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
we spoke about everything: poetry, her pregnancy, where she wants to give birth, how she's
Mm-hmm.
planning her birth, her midwives, everything. And it was really lovely. And then
Yeah.
she had the baby. She had a really, really wonderful birth experience. And then a couple months after that, her father died. And
Uh-huh.
she was just at sea. And she said to me, like, there's no like formula. There's no there's no ritual that I'm supposed to be doing. I could grab something from wherever and do it, but I would love for that. She was saying that she wanted there to be some kind of, you know, ritual that she could grieve within. She felt quite lost.
Yeah.
And of course grief is, loss. You do feel lost, but I think the idea of having a grid, is like a schedule, a ritual, is so useful in all of these
Yeah.
transitions. Like she found her birth ritual with me. We worked on it for almost a year. She contacted me very early in her pregnancy. So, but as far as the grieving ritual with her father, it took her a long time. Um, and that was during deep COVID, so she was pretty isolated as well. And it's definitely one thing that we're missing.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely, I agree. I think that kind of idea of like being at sea, it can feel like grief can feel like that, can't it? And I don't know whether kind of ritual provides an anchor, so like it can still feel really wavy and rocky and bumpy, but there's something that's anchoring.
Yes. Yeah. So okay, I'm supposed to feel like this for a week, and then I'm going to feel another way, and just to have some kind of a vessel to
Yeah.
put it in.
Yeah.
Um,
And just like documenting, I think like sometimes we don't see the changes. We don't like realize like how we are feeling. Like it all can feel overwhelming and all consuming. But I think
yeah.
sometimes like having a way of documenting that you can, journaling's my thing. Certainly I look back in my journals and I can tap into how I was feeling,
Yeah.
on the days, when I wrote any given page, I can immediately tap into that. And that's got a way of also like, showing how you can shift through things as well. You can see that change in the pages of your journal.
So I've seen pictures of you and a bunch of ladies jumping into barrels. Please talk to me about that.
So yeah, so in one of the journaling sessions that I run online, one person who came had a farm, and they were looking at setting. Oh, had a baby wake up, and they had a farm that they were looking at setting up into a campsite. And she just said, "Would you like to run a retreat here? Should we run a retreat?" And I said, "Yeah, great." And so we've done it a couple of years now, and her partner set up a company that make barrels for people to dip in, so cold water dipping, and they have some on the campsite. So they have three barrels set up that we could dip in throughout the course of the weekend.
Well, that's definitely got me thinking, because we actually have barrels in Canada that we brought years ago from Italy, because we had a farm here and we had a vineyard, and we have barrels. So I think I might start dipping in my backyard
Yeah,
in Montreal. That's
yeah,
going to be a hoot. Everyone's, well, anyway, I live in the middle of the
yeah.
city of Montreal, so it'll be funny.
Well, it's perfect. I think that's the whole idea of it, that people can dip in these barrels when they don't have access to lakes or rivers.
Yeah.
But yeah, they can just put it in the back garden. So they've got a little seat in, and a little step up.
Oh, well, mine doesn't have a little seat, but I'm sure I'll be able to figure something out.
Yeah, no, I think you'll be able to put one in.
Yeah. So a final thing that I ask all of the people that I speak to on my podcast is, if you had one word to share with all of our listeners, what would that word be?
Oof. That's really tricky, isn't it? Do other people struggle with this?
Yes. Some people want to say 10 words, other people can't
I
think of a
think,
word.
yeah, I'm going to think, my word's going to be curiosity. I think that's the key, really, is just to be curious. Be curious.
Lovely. I wasn't expecting that. That's perfect.
About other people and about yourself. Has anybody else chosen curiosity?
No, you're a very curious person.
Oh, good. I've chosen a word that nobody else has chosen. I like that.
You've chosen a life that nobody else has chosen.
I have, yeah. I seem to have done. Thank you.
Well, thank you
so much.
so much.
Yeah. No, thank you. I've really, really enjoyed our chats.
Well, we were lucky we had two. Technology provided us with two opportunities to chat.
Yeah, I'm grateful for that.